Hi there. This is my plugin video. This is me going over all the plugins that I have for this project and that I'm using a lot. I have too many plugins, if I'm totally honest, but these are the ones that I'm actually going to be using. A lot of them are covered above in the written sections above: Pro Q3, Pro C2, the BX console, and Pro R. But I'm going to go over all of them. There'll also be links to the timestamps for this video in their descriptions. But I'm also going to cover some others rather quickly just so that you understand what I'm using. And when you see me using them on stream, you understand what they are and can glean exactly what they do. So we're going to start off with the classic Pro Q3. It's just a great EQ. It does everything extremely smoothly. The bands move really quickly. It's got some cool features, like it's got this tilt EQ feature that lets you push up as much as down either side of it. It's pretty cool. I don't use it for much, but it's just useful. All of the knobs, all the dragging feels amazing. It all feels extremely responsive, extremely quick. In comparison to something like Logic's channel EQ, it has infinite bands, meaning that you can really sculpt exactly what you want. Just for your information, I'm using the same track as I had in the video above, me going over my hybrid mixing setup. This is Naturally by Alan Stone, a good analog for vaguely what I think Finn may turn out. You can see it displays the frequencies really well. The dark grey ones, I believe, are the pre-EQ, and the lighter grey ones, the post-EQ. It just gives you a really good idea of what you're actually doing to the sound. If you the frequency, it freezes it and then gives you notes on exactly where you should be focusing. So you've got 912 hertz there, 2.1 kilohertz there. It's just a very useful feature for giving you ideas of where things should be. The analyzer is also very useful. So say, for example, I put some Pro Q3 on this drum bus. Right? Pop that on the drum bus. If I now check this Pro Q3, I can see drums, like that. And that red one are my drum EQ. So this is extremely useful for working on things that involve a lot of masking. Say if you're working on keys and vocals. So these little red sections that show up there, they are masking warnings, basically. So the more red that shows up in an area, the more that's getting masked by what you're seeing at the moment. And the fact that these plugins can work with each other to show you this is just so useful. It means that you can work on your drum EQ via your keys EQ and not have to leave that EQ. It's such a nice workflow, and that's what the FabFilter plugins are all about. Workflow, workflow, workflow. They are quick. They're extremely quick. If you need some sort of multi-band expansion or compression, the EQ has that built in. So say, for example, you've got a track that has some very high end in the chorus. Well, you can set the EQ up to be your standard EQ, but then when the chorus hits and that high end comes in, it'll start ducking that high end once it gets past a certain threshold, meaning that you have more control over your stuff without needing to get in there and be extremely granular. The other extremely nice thing about FabFilter is that it's not only a stereo style EQ, it also does mid-side. So it can process your mono middle and your stereo sides separately, and you can EQ that. One thing that I really like doing with FabFilter is if I just go over to this B section, I'll just put something at about 200, go to a side, and then just set it as a low cut. That means that I'm getting no side frequencies below 200, or at least in a slope down below 200. And it gives just my middle just so much more punch. And this is all just from an EQ plugin. Easily one of the most boring plugins you can buy, just EQ. But FabFilter has done it so well that there's actually things to talk about in it. It's a great, great plugin. So moving on from Pro Q3, I'm going to go over to Pro C2. Pro C2 is an excellent compressor made by FabFilter as well. You're going to see some FabFilter on this list of plugins because they just make such utilitarian plugins. They are so useful to a mixing workflow, and you know they have this amazing UI design and the amazing interface and everything, but they also sound great, which is the best thing. Like Pro Q3 does not affect the tonal characteristics at all outside of the changes that you make, meaning it's the perfect EQ unless you want character, but you can get that character from their other alternative, which is Volcano. But back to Pro C2. Pro C2 has clean, classic, opto, vocal, mastering, bus, punch, and pumping compression modes. So those are 8 different styles of compressors built into this one plugin. That means that you're getting like 90% of your work that you want done with a compressor is done with Pro C2 if you want it to be. It can easily deal with that. So your clean is just like a standard digital style compressor. Obviously FabFilter, the interface is great. Your readouts are great. Very accurate. What I like as well is that it's got this little help section that when you hover over things, it tells you exactly what they do, which is always useful. But yeah, if we carry on with what is that? Obviously we have the sidechain. We've got EQable sidechain, internal and external, so you can EQ the things that will hit the compressor inside, so that could just be what you're running in, or externally we could run, say for example, the keys in, so that the compressor on the keys, when it detects a vocal coming in, we run the vocals into that compressor via the sidechain, the keys will duck, meaning that the vocals are masked less by the keys and the keys have more room to sit somewhere else. Yeah. It has look ahead. Look ahead is really useful if you want an extremely accurate compressor, say for mastering, and don't mind a little bit of latency, and oversampling for the more saturated, punchy compressors like pumping and punch. The other thing it has as well is parallel compression via the dry and wet gain here. Also the auto gain feature, because it just lets you set and forget basically, and lets you make all your tweaks without blowing your own ears out or blowing anyone who's watching you on streams ears out, which is always pretty useful. But I don't tend to use this dry gain feature a lot because I like to put my compressors in sends, bus sends like this. And I feel it just makes it easier for me because I can send my audio in a slightly more granular way, and I can have the full effect of a compressor without worrying about the parallel signal inside the compressor. But yeah, Pro C2, it's not had an update in a while. It's probably going to be the next FabFilter thing that they update, hopefully. But it's a rather old compressor, but it will cover like 90% of what I do. Moving on to our third FabFilter culprit. I'll put it off. Is Pro R. Pro R is a reverb, and it is the most reverby one. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It does reverb, but it does extremely nice reverbs. It's not convolution, which is where you get an impulse response of a room, so it'll basically model a room. It's algorithmic, so it's built purely via software, but it sounds great. Like, let me put it on the drum. It's with. That's it out. And you can tell FabFilter, obviously, they're going to put an amazing EQ on this. This is also infinite band, I believe. No, it's not. It's up to 5. But what this lets you do is it lets you EQ your output signal and your input signal. Yeah, the decay rate. So you can have certain sections decay quicker than others. So you can have your highs stay for a long time and your lows go away very quickly, almost like a delay, like how a tape and an analog delay works. And what's really nice about this is, first of all, obviously the presets are great. All the presets are useful. You can lock the mix knob, meaning that the mix can always stay at 100 regardless of the preset you're going through. Meaning that for a send effect, it's an thing, because I can just flip through a preset till I find something that I like, tweak it a little bit, and then I'm done. I don't have to be messing around with the mix knob every time I go to a new preset. And again, it's just FabFilter. They are an extremely quick company to work with. They are always making products that are quick. So it's not overly complicated, yet it's an extremely complex plugin. So your standard controls on there. So you got your space, which controls how long it sounds. You got your decay rate, which is again how long the reverb will follow out. The distance, so how close the microphone is to the source and the reverb. It gives you a lot of options. Your brightness, which is where you can do very basic tone control style shaping in comparison to your more accurate EQing. Your stereo width, you can make it sound extremely wide or very mono. Yeah, it's a great reverb. It's not necessarily, it doesn't do rooms, it doesn't do plates, it doesn't do springs, it does a lot of spaces, I think they call them, where it's basically, yes, it sounds like a hall or a cathedral or that kind of thing, but you can use the tools that they provide you to make it sound more like a spring version or a plate version. Sadly, it doesn't do anything like shimmer, but in a mixing context, that's not really that applicable regardless. So moving on from this one, I touched on this one in my what was it? Yeah, the hybrid mixing video. So this is BX console. It's a model of a solid state Logic 9000J, a console used by Michael Brower. Obviously, you can tell if you've read above in my 3 styles of mixing section, I rather like Michael Brower. And yeah, this console's just great. It lets me work like I'm on a mixing desk. I put this on the majority of my channels, and using this TMT feature, it has 72 different, what would they call it? Variations on the channel strip. So nothing changes apart from like slightly being more mid-rangey or having slightly quicker bass response or something like that. It just emulates this analog style that you actually have when you're working with a console. Like the one that we have in college, for example, has dodgy channels. One will be slightly more mid-rangey than the other, that kind of thing. And it's it's an API. It's not some cheap Behringer or that kind of thing. That's what consoles like this have. They always have slight differences, and that's what analog is. That's why two compressors will never be exactly the same, and that's what this is trying to emulate. And just having this plugin completely set to 0 on everything, but with this TMT different on each, will make my tracks sound a lot more like they're recorded on a real desk. And that's what I'm after. I'm after that analog sound without needing £70,000 of analog gear here in my home studio. Because I don't have that money at the moment. But if you've ever seen an SSL channel strip before, you know this setup. It's got 2 regular filters here, your sidechain, your dynamics, which is a compressor. You've got another compressor here. I believe this might actually be a limiter, if I remember correctly, or an expander. They vary depending on the model. Then you've got your standard SSL style EQ here. It's a parametric EQ, meaning that it's controlled via knobs instead of like a graphic style like FabFilter. You can swap to an E channel or a G channel style EQ, which is always useful, so it gives you even more versatility. And what I really like about it is you have just less options Because I showed you the fab filter stuff, and you can tell that stuff is an extremely in-depth piece of kit. You have all of these options, everything. You look at Pro Q3, it's just a line when you start. You have to make all the decisions yourself. With this, it's like working with analog gear. You just turn a few things, push a few parameters. You don't necessarily look at what you're EQing, what you're not, and in the end, you come out with good sound based on what your ears think, not what your eyes see. And I think that's a lot closer to what mixing should be. There's a plugin that another company makes. I can't quite remember what it's called, but it's basically it's an EQ with no frequency numbers on it. You purely have to use your ears, and that's what I really like about using something like this. Obviously, there are numbers on it, but I try my best not to look at them, and I think I get great results from it. It just adds character and lets me do the hybrid mixing thing without necessarily losing control on the individual channels. Because quickly, say I need to EQ a kick or I need to do this, I can quickly change it, done. And that's what's really good about it. So I'll just have a little mess about with it on the master of this track and see what you think. Always free. You see what I mean? Instantly, I've started shaping the sound to what I want. Obviously, that's like a top-down style that I don't really do, but it gives an idea of what it's like. Yeah, I really like this plugin. I think it's really useful. It's better, in my opinion, than the official SSL channel strip that SSL themselves make, the native plugin. But that could just be my opinion. I think it sounds better. I've tried both. Sadly, I tried them a long time before this course, otherwise I would have made a shootout video like the one below, the tape shootout on those, but my free trials ran out on them. Well, that covers all the main plugins, but I'm just going to go into a few other ones. So if you know anything about electronic music, mixing, production, you'll know what this is. This is OTT made by Xfer. This is an extremely famous plugin, and it's kind of a joke. Almost people tend to joke about OTT a little bit, because when you first turn OTT on like this and the depth is at 100%, it sounds like this. Yeah. And you would think, after listening to that, how would you ever use that? Well, if you pull that depth quite far back, start doing this, because it's a multi-band upwards and downwards compressor, meaning that you can compress upwards and downwards separately and compress your bands separately. So your high end could be compressed a lot more than your low end, and your mid-range could be compressed a lot different to either of them. And OTT just has this character that tends to make things pop and sit at the same time, and it really sits in life. So if I turn this off, oh, beautiful maiden, it makes things hit harder, it makes things hit more, but at the same time it also softens out things if you turn it down. It's just an extremely useful thing that I'll probably use on a lot of my stuff, but I will use it very situationally, because it can be a bit like using too much of one ingredient if you have it on a lot of things, because there's this certain sound that builds up, especially if you're using, for example, something that emulates analog hiss, like a tape emulation or something like that, because it picks that up and it boosts it, especially if you're boosting the high end. So it needs to be used in moderation, but when used correctly, it can sound amazing, especially on vocals. What else do I use? There's one that you'll see me talk about a lot, but it's a one-trick pony for me. It's this. It's the Mag EQ4 made by Plugin Alliance. So all I use this for is this one band. So this is a modeling of a real thing. This is a 500 series unit that you can buy in real life. But what it has is an air band. And if you push this air band up to 40,000 kilohertz, just keep in mind, humans can only hear up to about 20 kilohertz maximum. So we're pushing past the audible range. We can push this air gain up, and I'll just show you. Wasting all the money on that body. It just gives a lot more air, what's called that, to the high end. It just boosts it in this very natural way that means that it's not necessarily too ice picky, because you can have this problem with high end where it almost starts hurting your ears. Like a hi-hat will be too brittle and start really getting at your ears, and you'll start getting people saying, I can't listen to all of this track. And that's what this helps do, is it helps boost your high end and get that stuff sounding clear without it sounding ice picky, which is an extremely desirable thing. So moving on, we will go to probably the last thing that I'll show you, because I know that I'll be using this, but I'm not sure if I'll be using this that much. And apart from that, I'm pretty sure everything else will be an extremely situational use. So this is the Blackbox H2 saturator. So this is a real hardware unit. You can buy one of these in real life for about £8,000. So I can't, but there's a version of it made by Plugin Alliance, and it's excellent. What it does is it's just a saturation unit with an airband, so it does that same mag EQ thing. I don't think it sounds as good, so I don't really use it. I'll just put the mag EQ before it, but I do use it sometimes if I'm pressed on processing power, or if I just feel that it sounds good. It doesn't most of the time, but situationally sometimes it can sound good. I find it sounds rather nice on things like bass guitars. But the main attraction of this is its pentode and triode saturation stages that you can dial in independently. So pentode and triode are vacuum tube types that you're working with in this. So you can dial in how much pentode and triode saturation you want separately, meaning that you can dial in your character extremely close to exactly what you want. So I'll just show you what this sounds like. You can hear it just adds this grit to something without necessarily being too boomy. It can do that, and I'm sure you heard that small section where it got a little too boomy. But that to me just screams versatility, because I can then use that on something like an EDM drop or something similar to that, because I'm not necessarily just thinking about Finn's work when I use these, because there's a big commitment to using a plugin as often as I use these plugins that I've shown you. You're essentially committing to learn them, because if you don't know how to use them, well, you may end up using it wrong, and it may end up messing up your mix. Which is why you see mixing engineers start using plugins for 10 years and not wanting to upgrade to the new one or something like that, because they know their old one. It's the same with people moving phones, anything like that, going between Mac and Windows. It's something you get used to after a while, and it's something you commit your time to learning. And obviously this is a rather simple plugin, but I think that it sounds great. All of these plugins that I've shown you sound great, because that's the thing with plugins. Sometimes people will say they don't sound good, they don't sound as good as analog. I think they sound different to analog. Analog has its own character, but its own problems, and so do plugins. But these plugins, I am convinced, will deliver me a good result on Finn's album. I really hope that they do, and I'm sure that they will carry me across the line. I'm very thankful for all watching. It's been about 25 minutes. Yeah, I'll catch you further down the page probably.